John McCarty here, talking about logical relationships for the LSAT. So sometimes things mean the same thing as something else, so they're equal to each other. They mean the same thing. Sometimes they mean the opposite thing, right? So we want to know the logical relationships. What are the exact meanings of certain things? Because your brain may work in one mode much easier than another. So if you know that one phrase means the same as another, you may be able to just switch the phrase, and then all of a sudden your intuition will kick in and really help you push through. So we have a few things that mean the same thing as each other. So let's start with must be true. So something that means, and we're talking in terms of truth and false, right? So something that means the same as must be true. How could you say that with the word false instead? It cannot be false, right? If it cannot be false, then it must be true. So those two things mean the same thing. A lot of times people get really geared into must be true. They're like, all right, I know what this means. I know how to do this. But then they see cannot be false. And they're like, oh no, what am I doing here? Like this double negative thing is messing me up. Just convert it to must be true, or vice versa. Whatever works well for you. All right. And then we also have phrases like not necessarily true, which would be the logical opposite of must be true. So if something either must be true or it's not necessarily true. And there's probably a lot of things that are not necessarily true, and a few things that must be true. So they're logical opposites of each other. When we talk about logical opposites, we mean things that cover the whole spectrum of possibility. So it's not must be true versus must be false. Those are not logical opposites, because there's all this middle ground of stuff that could be true, could be false, right? So we want logical opposites on the LSAT typically when we're thinking. So must be true versus not necessarily true. Those are the opposites of each other. Now, not necessarily true, if we want to speak about that in terms of falsity, could be false is the same as not necessarily true, right? If something's not necessarily true, then it's possible that it's false. It could be false. If it could be false, it's not necessarily true, right? So cannot be false and must be true are logical opposites of not necessarily true and could be false. Not necessarily true and could be false mean the same thing. Must be true and cannot be false mean the same thing as well. And they're logical opposites in those two buckets. A lot of times people do flashcards for these. I would highly recommend it. We're going to go through one more pairing so that we have this thing totally rounded out. So you'll see could be true questions. Given the information, what could be true. So if we're going to talk about in terms of falsity, could be true is the same as not necessarily false. If it's not necessarily false, it could be true. Now that's kind of wordy and weird, right? So a lot of times when people see not necessarily false, immediately they'll move it over to could be true. Probably a good idea for most people. On the other side, our logical opposite of could be true is cannot be true, if we're wording in terms of truth. So something cannot be true, there's no way it could be true, right? So these are the logical opposites, and they cover all aspects of possibility. Cannot be true, if it's worded in terms of falsity, it would be must be false. Now, for some people, the false statement there is actually a little more intuitive. It must be false. For some people, it just really makes sense versus cannot be true. But must be false and cannot be true are the exact same thing. And could be true and not necessarily false are the exact same thing. And these two groupings are logical opposites of each other. So make sure that you know these, put these in your head, put these on flashcards, really work through these, and find which one you have kind of a natural intuition towards. And a lot of times if you see the other one, just convert it over and make it easy on yourself. All right. So that's everything for logical relationships.